2NURFM, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.
Well, some interesting stats coming out of the US that very, very shortly millennials and younger people are going to, for the first time, outnumber baby boomers. And with their recent election in the United States, there was the rise of Bernie Sanders. He didn't get over the line. He wasn't able to tackle Hillary Clinton. But Jim Jones, Professor of Politics, good morning. The Bernie factor. What happened? And can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, good morning, Mark. The Bernie factor. Let me come back to the millennials first so that we got a sort of sense of who they are. Millennials are largely the generation born from around about 1980. So today, typical millennial born at the beginning of that period would be in their mid-30s, or mid to late 30s now. So, and then going back down to sort of the 1990s, mid-1990s, where that's sort of the cut-off for the millennials. They tended to support Bernie Sanders. There was at least in most of the sort of surveys, millennials were coming out in support of Bernie Sanders for the Democratic nomination and probably would have carried that support on towards the election. Why they were leaning towards Bernie Sanders was largely because he seemed to speak the language that they were needing to hear. Millennials are faced with the situation where it's likely that the generation of millennials are not going to earn the same level of income that their parents or grandparents in the baby boomer generation. So for the first time in US history, the American middle class, the children of baby boomers are not going to be as successful in terms of income and wealth. This is a bit of a worrying prospect, but it's also sociologically worrying when the prosperity of the middle class is declining. And this is one of the big issues, and has been one of the big issues underpinning the US elections. The declining American middle class, the declining living standards, and in particular, it's not just simply about the Rust Belt issues. These are sort of common in many industrialised countries. It's not just about where the jobs are, but the sort of jobs, and also the thinking around the casualisation of the workforce, so that millennials are part of the generation, and those who are coming after them are entering a workforce and becoming part of a workforce which is increasingly casualised and fragmented, so that the career paths, the sense of security that their parents perhaps enjoyed doesn't seem to be there.
We are seeing this right across the political spectrum though, aren't we? That these are problems that are facing society at the moment, and the thought that many politicians or career-based politicians are so out of touch with these issues, and we are seeing rise to, of course, the likes of Bernie Sanders. I guess Donald Trump is another one, and potentially here in Australia, people like Pauline Hanson to a lesser degree. How are we finding that these guys are able to push through? Well,
there's a sort of recognition that they are tapping a particular very sensitive area, which is largely to do with the jobs, with people's future. And they're recognising that many of the policies of the past 30 years have shifted jobs offshore. They've left industries in decline. Now, all of this might make sense from a particular, shall we say, economic perspective, and certainly the advocates of very liberalised trade and so on would suggest that, we all benefit in the long run. However, for those industries and those areas that where their jobs disappear and aren't being replaced with similar types of jobs, not necessarily in the same type of industry, but jobs with security and a long-term future. There are many jobs in the service sector, which is growing rapidly and is a main employer of people, particularly millennials. The security in those areas is very precarious. So when people like Bernie Sanders start to address those sorts of things and speak to a wider public that we need to think more carefully about our economic policies and our industry policies so that we can ensure a future for our younger younger people, this resonates very, very much with millennials and with the next generation as well. The baby boomers had, in many respects, the long economic boom which lasted until the early 60s to mid-60s, and in Australia it sort of petered out in the mid-70s, 74, 73.
Yeah, certainly a bit tough if you're looking for a job, and that's a whole other discussion as well. So we know that Bernie did do quite well, particularly with younger generations. It seemed like he was going to get the nod from the Democratic Party, but they went with Hillary Clinton, which is a step back to the political establishment. So all this cry out for something different, something new, somebody that's not part of the political elite, I guess, and then all of a sudden he's gone. So what happened? Why did they go to what they knew?
Well, I think in Bernie Sanders' case, he was a self-described socialist in the old-fashioned sense, someone who believed...
It's a dirty word, isn't it?
Well, within US political culture, one needs to understand that there's a very narrow political spectrum of respectability, if you like. The sort of the Democrats and the Republicans used to sit in the centre of a spectrum, and neither went too far left or too far right. That's changed quite radically, with both the Democrats and the Republicans shifting much further to the right wing of the political spectrum. And the Republican Party now has a sort of very extreme right wing component. But Bernie Sanders was an old-fashioned socialist, and in the context of the Democrat Party, he was seen as a major challenge. Hillary Clinton was very much still seen as a Wall Street supporter and business supporter, so was not a threat, whereas Bernie Sanders would have been seen by many of the movers and shakers in the Democrat Party as a threat to business as usual. Donald Trump wasn't seen as a threat to business as usual because he is a major business force in his own right, and he's never going to go against Wall Street, no matter what his rhetoric might be. He might go against this part or that part, but he's not going to be anti-business in general, whereas Bernie Sanders was seen as, would have been seen as somebody who might have been a threat to business interests, and therefore, for the Democrats, was not a good candidate for president.
All about perception and charisma, I guess. Jim Jones, thank you for your insight again this week.
My pleasure, Mark.
2NURFM 103.7.